CM Punk as a wrestler. I'm going to be even more of a bigger fan of CM Punk as a fighter in the UFC, because for someone to have balls, seemingly, to say whatever he wanted on a WWE microphone, he should have balls enough to fight inside the octagon, which is why I think CM Punk is going to be able to hold his own against some of the top UFC fighters. Now, first off, when this announcement was made, that Punk was crossing over from wrestling into the UFC, knowing that they were two very different worlds, I was kind of very skeptical on CM Punk going from wrestling to the UFC so quickly. Others have done it so quickly, but here's the thing, people like Brock Lesnar and Dave Bautista were very fitting. They had a role of being a UFC fighter, following them from wrestling into the UFC. They fitted and adapted into the UFC world, I think, quicker than someone like a CM Punk is going to be able to. And I think that CM Punk is definitely, even though it's going to take him some time to adjust from wrestling into UFC, is going to be the first of a lot of young wrestlers like a Daniel Bryan to make a crossover from wrestling into the UFC. He's going to be the first of a lot of young competitors that we're going to get a chance to see fighting in the UFC. It's a very different world. I know I've covered them for about 16 years, and I know that wrestling and the UFC are two very different worlds and two very different concepts to definitely grasp, and I think CM Punk is going to find it very challenging. He's not going to grasp that concept immediately, but he is going to be able to adjust and adjust very effectively, although it will take him some time. And who knows? We may get a WWE matchup of some opponents CM Punk had in his WWE career fighting him in the UFC. We may see CM Punk and Dave Bautista. We may see eventually CM Punk and Brock Lesnar for the first time ever in the UFC octagon. And I think that, Punk is going to last. He was put over as a character. What was interesting about CM Punk was he was put over as one of the few new talented wrestlers who could have survived in the Attitude Era with the Rocks and Stone Cold Steve Austins of the WWE, because he wasn't afraid to say what was on his mind when given a WWE microphone, or as he refers to it as, a pipe bomb. So with how much guts CM Punk had and how he was put over as one of the few new talented wrestlers who could have survived and held his own in the Attitude Era, why can't we say the same thing about CM Punk as a UFC fighter? I'm all for CM Punk competing in the UFC. I'll even go as far to say that CM Punk, maybe not immediately, but eventually, CM Punk is going to follow in the footsteps of Brock Lesnar and win the UFC Championship. Check out this scenario painted in bright lights for you, put on display. CM Punk, UFC Heavyweight Champion of the World. I think that is something that could become a reality if CM Punk remains dedicated to the UFC. Let's hope he remains just as dedicated as he was in the earlier years of his wrestling career to being a UFC fighter. Let's hope he doesn't drop his ball, take it and go home like a lot of people think that CM Punk is going to do. That's very interesting how people feel about CM Punk. A lot of people think that CM Punk is just going to take his ball from the UFC and go home. I am one who refuses to agree with that analysis, because CM Punk, in my opinion, has been very dedicated. Yes, he quit WWE a number of times, but he quit WWE a number of times because of how WWE dealt with his character, because of a point of confusion that was reached with the CM Punk character. Phil Brooks took his ball and went home the way Stone Cold Steve Austin did, only in different circumstances back in 2002. 2003, Stone Cold was gone for a number of months with animosity towards Vince McMahon and WWE, and CM Punk's been gone for a number of months. But CM Punk, in my opinion, never did leave the WWE. Take a look at the response he got at the 2015 Royal Rumble. He wasn't even there in the Royal Rumble match, and they were chanting for CM Punk to come out near the end of the match, and we didn't get that. In Philadelphia, fans are still chanting his name, even though he isn't on show cards. He isn't attending live shows or attending tapings of shows for WWE, but he's still getting over. He's getting a phenomenal response. He was in WWE 2K15 showcasing his rivalry with John Cena from 2011, which made him into a mega superstar. So he still has something to do with WWE. It's almost as if he never left, and now he's just choosing a different career path by heading down the road of competing in the octagon in the UFC. And so many people have done it before CM Punk. There are going to be many people to do it after CM Punk, but as I said here earlier, he's going to be the first of a lot of superstars in the way of Daniel Bryan and Seth Rollins to cross over from professional wrestling into the UFC after they have done it all or enough in their minds for their wrestling careers, because there's only so many things you can do in professional wrestling. After becoming a 15 or 16-time champion, eventually at some point in your career you're going to say you've done enough, and you're going to want to do more in the way of The Rock. The Rock was about a 7 or 8-time WWE champion. He left the WWE, and then he left to achieve more in Hollywood. He did that. He came back and won the title an 8th time, and now he's gone again, making scattered appearances for WWE. People do so much in wrestling and then make the decision to leave and come back and do something else after a number of years of being absent. And we have a lot going on here In 2015, a lot of rumor returns of Dave Bautista and Randy Orton, former Evolution members. We could see Sting and Triple H at WrestleMania, although it has not been made official. That's what I'm predicting we're going to see in the main event of WrestleMania this year. The return of The Undertaker. There are so many things, and Goldberg is another huge return rumored, along with CM Punk possibly returning in 2015. Now, even though I do believe CM Punk will make a good UFC fighter and possibly a future UFC heavyweight champion of the world, that is an amazing scenario, putting it into perspective. And really, when you sit back and think about it, CM Punk being UFC heavyweight champion of the world, even though I think he would make a fitting UFC fighter and champion in the octagon in the way the Ken Shamrocks, the Dave Batistas, and Brock Lesnar's, who have all gone on to achieve history in the Ultimate Fighting Championship as some champions and some contenders for that championship. The thing is, CM Punk, in my opinion, I still hold the belief that we will see him return one day in WWE and compete in a WWE ring, either that or a TNA ring. Now, he does make independent wrestling appearances, apparently, but I don't think he's getting over as much as what he would appearing in front of 25,000 to 30,000 fans a night, which he would do in the UFC. CM Punk is someone who sells out arenas, in my opinion, and CM Punk needs to be in an arena with 25 to 30,000 people as opposed to 100 to 150 fans, which is the biggest crowd a independent wrestling promotion usually draws. CM Punk, in my opinion, does not deserve to be downgraded to that level of performing in front of 100 to 150 fans for an independent wrestling promotion. And if he were to wrestle for an independent wrestling promotion on a consistent basis, it would have to be in the way of a Colt Cabana wrestling for Ring of Honor, where he really got to start in professional wrestling for at least a decade before ever being signed by WWE and working with them with a working relationship that lasted almost 6 years before CM Punk threw his ball down and left in 2011 and 2013 when his quitting of WWE made wrestling headlines. The thing is, Punk, in my opinion, is a main eventer all around. He's a 5-star performer, and he could potentially be one of the best wrestlers in the world. 434 days as WWE Champion, beating out the reigns of Hulk Hogan from 91 and Bret Hart from 1994. He beat out the reign of Kevin Nash, who held the championship 358 days, as opposed to CM Punk, who went on to hold it well over 100 extra days than Kevin Nash of 434. He beat out the reigns of Yokozuna and Shawn Michaels. I mean, the statistics CM Punk produced in his reign of WWE Champion, his second or third reign as a WWE World Champion, were very impressive. He also aligned himself with Paul Heyman, who will go down in history as potentially one of the greatest wrestling managers of all time. And do I think Paul Heyman did wonders for CM Punk's career? Yes, I did, because CM Punk was put over to the heights of unprecedentedness because of Paul Heyman, the only man who wanted something to have anything to do with CM Punk in terms of WWE creative. Here's the deal. Nobody knew what to do with Punk's character. Paul Heyman was the only one who had faith, if you would, in CM Punk, and he really ran with CM Punk in that ball, and yet Punk in matches with Brock Lesnar, The Undertaker, and made him into one of the greatest WWE champions of all time. Now, reverse that scenario. What if Punk, after being one of the greatest WWE champions of all time, became one of the greatest UFC champions of all time in a very different world, in very different circumstances? I think ratings will be produced for pay-per-view buy rates for the UFC, and there will be a lot of fans subscribing to the UFC Facebook fan page and UFC fan page on Twitter because people like CM Punk are signing contracts with the UFC. The thing is, you can't always rely on other wrestling promotions like TNA to produce different deals that are far better than what WWE would produce in terms of a wrestling promotion, because they are the kings of wrestling. The thing is, I think the UFC, unlike other years, is providing direct competition for WWE and giving them far better deals to the likes of Dave Bautista and Brock Lesnar. And if CM Punk is presented a better deal for the UFC, who can blame him for taking it? I know if I were in the position of CM Punk and I were a trained UFC fighter, I'd probably take the deal of the UFC that was offered to me over a deal that would have been offered to me from WWE if I were a wrestler in my previous years of being involved with the sports world. In my opinion, this is a deal that CM Punk can pass up, and obviously he's not going to, and that's why we could possibly see CM Punk as the future UFC heavyweight champion of the world. And point blank, hands down, without a shadow of a doubt or there being any question in anyone's mind who listens to this show, people have asked me what I thought about CM Punk being a UFC fighter, competing with the UFC, and possibly being UFC heavyweight champion of the world. Without a doubt, CM Punk will win in history for being these two things. One of them is a future WWE Hall of Famer, and one of them undoubtedly is a future UFC heavyweight champion of the world. based off his statistics and the numbers Punk has performed in front of anywhere from 25 to 30,000 fans. The biggest crowd he ever performed at was at WrestleMania's 28 and 29. At WrestleMania 28, I think there were something like 75,000 fans he performed in front of. I mean, how do you go from performing in front of 75,000 fans to 150 to 200 fans, which is the biggest crowd an indie wrestling promotion could ever draw at tickets ranging anywhere from $15 to $20? In my opinion, CM Punk needs to be in front of a pay-per-view crowd, so why not take the offer from the UFC? I mean, we've seen him in independent wrestling. We've seen him in major wrestling promotions like WWE. We've seen him as champion, and we know what CM Punk can do. Now let's start putting him over and talking about him. Let's start creating conversation on social media, which has been an absolute buzz ever since rumors of CM Punk competing in the UFC first broke and were published by pro wrestling news websites like ProWrestling.com and ours. I think every 30 minutes when this news first broke, something was popping up in relevance to CM Punk being a UFC fighter, and that's when people on Facebook and Twitter and even outside of it were starting to ask me, what is my opinion of CM Punk being a UFC fighter? And my opinion of CM